Academies and officers training colleges, welcome on the 8th anniversary of the liberation of our country. In the spring of 1945, following liberation, Hungary formally remained a sovereign country. In reality, she became a Soviet colony, sinking to the role of a satellite of the Soviet Union. Moscovites returning from the Soviet Union, led by Rákosi, Gerő, Farkas and Révai, struggled to establish an absolute rule of the Communist Party. The infamous state secret police, the AVO, were established. Stalin established an unprecedented regime and cult of personality. Tens and tens of millions fell victim to the tyranny. When, in the March of 1953, the feared dictator died, even those working nearest to him were relieved. Rákosi was ordered to Moscow, reproached for his excesses and later relieved from his position.
The world is grieving. Life has stopped for 5 minutes. Comrade Stalin is being put to rest now. Since then, these pictures have circled the world. Stalin died, but his personality cult still prevailed. The statue at this moment was still standing firm on its foundation. As a first sign of détente, Imre Nagy became the prime minister in the summer of 1953. Imre Nagy had internment camps closed, saving the lives of thousands of people. He also eased somewhat on compulsory contribution in kind. The Rákosi gang, however, cunningly managed to isolate Imre Nagy and regain power. The Rákosi-like propaganda machine went into motion, documenting that everything was just fine. Comrade Rákosi is eating heartily, and the people wish him a good appetite.
When at the 20th Congress, Khrushchev exposed the crimes of Stalin, the rule of Rákosi weakened again. He was replaced by the equally dictatorial and devilish Ernő Gerő, followed in his steps. In the early autumn of 1956, young intellectuals, university and college students demanded at public meetings of the Petőfi Circle and MEFES, the Association of Hungarian University and College Unions. So they demanded that the ruling system review its activity, that it punishes those responsible for criminal acts, and that it changes its dictatorial methods. Universities in Szeged, Budapest, Miskolc and Pécs had feverish debates for weeks. On 22nd of October, students at the Technical University in Budapest collected the demands of the youth and set them out in points, also deciding at the same time to organize a sympathy demonstration to support the events in Poland on 23rd of October. The city was in fever at 9 o'clock on Tuesday evening, the 23rd of October in the morning. I had no clues whatsoever of what was in the making. I only read the declaration of the Writers' Association in Szabadné, stating that they don't plan on any procession and don't condone it either. During the morning, I heard in the office that the students were planning to march to the BEM statue at 3 in the afternoon. 23rd of October 1956, a calm autumn day. The world didn't know yet what important events were unfolding this day in a small country at the heart of Europe. News agencies then published the news: revolution in Hungary, a small nation for whom freedom was above everything else, revolted against a brutal aggressor. Zsóka, returning from lunch by the suburban railway, says that the radio has just announced that all processions and rallies are forbidden. She brought this sheet of paper that she received from someone with the demands of the students of the Technical University. A decision is made to join the proposals of the Szeged students and establish the MEFES, chapter of the University of Architecture, Transport and Technical Sciences, to join the organization.
We university students were in a hopeful mood. We felt that changes were needed in Hungary. we decided to hand over our petition to the government and lay wreaths at the statues of General Bem and Petőfi. We adopted a petition with 16 demands, which was earlier complied by the Szeged students. We chanted in the streets, "Who is Hungarian should join us." First, the young workers joined us, then more and more pedestrians from the streets. Soon there were thousands in the crowd. I had seen many communist rallies before, them being compulsory, but always the same. Here, however, we experienced a completely new spirit, the breath of freedom. This rally was not ordered by the government. We Hungarians organized it. Speeches at the BAM statue were not only held by students. The Writers' Association expressed its support of the cause by sending politician writer Péter Veres. A young actor, Ferenc Besenyei, recited Petőfi's national song. We swear to God protecting Hungarians that we will not remain prisoners anymore. Everyone repeated this line from their hearts. We did not want to remain prisoners anymore. We cut the Soviet star from the Hungarian flag. Down with symbols of foreign tyranny.
The 16 demands of the university students attacked the communist regime.
We demand the immediate withdrawal of Soviet troops from Hungary.
We demand general, fair and fair elections with the participation of several parties.
A new National Assembly.
We demand the right of labor action for workers.
We demand comprehensive freedom of opinion, speech and press.
We demand that the Alliance coat of arms be abolished and the old Kossuth coat of arms be reinstated.
We demand that Hungarian soldiers wear the Hungarian national uniform.
The atmosphere is homely, Veres asks. Has the meeting been opened yet? I don't understand what the young people around him respond. Again I hear his voice. Are you the police? Are there any organizers? A few students go closer to Veres's organizers. The truth is that this program wasn't organized in any way. The government is startled. Gero, the first secretary of the party, delivers a radio address at 8 in the evening. The building was secured by an AVO unit. The commander ordered us to disperse. We refused. He then issued a fire order. A woman was hit next to me and I understood that there is no return from here. We have to fight. The incensed crowd turns against the AVO, who opened fire on unarmed civilians. The peaceful demonstration turned into an armed revolt. Several police and military units sided with the revolutionaries. Under the cover of 3 tanks, the people attacked the radio building.
Prime Minister Imre Nagy introduces martial law. All those who do not lay down their arms until 2 p.m. are subject to capital punishment. He does, however, promise the democratization of public life. The revolutionists, however, do not concede. Fighting goes on until the 25th of October, but the sacrifice was not in vain. Several thousands of people march under national flags and the black flag of mourning to the square in front of the parliament to protest against the Soviet military intervention.
We also built barricades from everything we could find. We wrote on huge signs to them, "Russians go home." The Molotov cocktails were our best weapons. We tied hand grenades to the petrol-filled flasks. The burning petrol would seep into the tank through the holes, and if it got as far as the engine, the tank would explode like an open shell. The crew died a horrible death. Well, we didn't call them. We didn't start the fight. From the beginning of the fighting, the troops in the Kilian garrison supplied the revolutionaries with weapons and ammunition. Intense fighting evolved here with the approach of the Russians. Colonel Maleta was appointed the garrison commander, but he wasn't willing to assist the Russians. When they attempted to disarm him and his soldiers, he issued the order for an armed resistance. It was this tank that fired the first shot and was later used by Maleta as his command post. Since there was an ample supply of ammunition in the garrison, the Kilian garrison became the center of the resistance in the part of the city. Reinforcements arrived for the revolutionaries when the AVO and the Soviets were not attacking. They had serious losses. The tanks of the Hungarian armed forces provided invaluable assistance against the unescorted Soviet tanks and the might of the AVO. Revolutionaries fly the Hungarian flag on the tanks, painting the Kossuth coat of arms in place of the Red Star. One of the 16 demands of the students has been met. The houses around the Corvin Theatre provided flank cover during the fights for the Kilian garrison. They fired on Soviet tanks from the housetops. After the tough battles, they can assess their losses. Russian soldiers who died in a foreign land, fighting against people who were not their enemies, Soviet soldiers who obeyed orders, and Hungarians who fought for freedom.
Unknown Hungarian, anonymous graves, flowers and wreaths at the foot of statues in the streets. Who knows whose relatives is buried here? Tears and mourning for Hungarian victims, help and medical assistance for the wounded. The official assessment changed radically since the 24th of October, when the radio talked about counter-revolutionist bandits. I myself could also verify just the opposite. Goods in the stores were untouched, even though their windows were broken. One of the stores had a sign, "Clothes secured at the janitor's place." Of the nations was initiated by the Writers' Association. The purity of our revolution allows us to collect this way for the families of our martyrs.
In the evening, 28th of October, Imre Nagy announces on the radio, the Hungarian government has agreed with the Soviet government. The Soviet troops will immediately start their withdrawal from Budapest. The Hungarian government will initiate negotiations on the withdrawal of the Soviet troops based in Hungary. We are to set up an integrated new state law enforcement organization and disband the state secret police. Nobody will be hurt for their participation in the armed conflict.
light of this, it is announced in New York that the United Nations will postpone the discussion of the Hungarian issue, hoping that the two most interested parties can meanwhile come to an agreement. These days, there's a star hunt on in Hungary. Symbols of the communist rule are removed. Only the boots of the statue of Stalin are left. The statue was cut up and taken home as a souvenir. Stars and other symbols of the communist regime fall. Only statues branding the former rules are left, like this one, which depicts the Soviet rule as a scarecrow. Every trace of tyranny is removed. Newspapers are published for the first time since the outbreak of the revolution. Honest opinions couldn't be published until now because of strict censorship. Even the communist Szabad Nép writes the following.
We don't agree with those who have labeled the events of the last days as counter-revolutionary fascist attempt at a coup d'etat. Later on, it rejects the allegations of Pravda in Moscow, saying we don't need imported munitions to win and to achieve our national independence. Imre Nagy announces on radio, in order to democratize the life of the nation further, the single-party system will be abolished and governance will return to the democratic cooperation of the political parties reorganized in 1945. The Kremlin is bewildered. The Hungarian Declaration of Independence can serve as an example for other oppressed nations of Eastern Europe. Moscow radio announces that the Soviet government is ready to withdraw its forces based in Hungary, Poland and Romania.
Families of the Soviet officials leave Budapest. The Hungarians do not attempt to hide their happiness. Demonstrators demand that Archbishop Mindszenty be set free. The 11th among the 16 demands of the students demanded the liberation of political prisoners. This did happen to some extent, but the Archbishop remained in the custody of the AVO. He was sentenced to life imprisonment at the beginning of 1949 in a mock trial. They tried everything to make him confess to his guilt. Soviet experts helped the AVO. They could only prove treason through illegal practices to make sure that he disappears from public life. Hungarians thus morally also condemned communism. It was natural that now they demanded the return of the Archbishop. The attempt at liberating him was successful. Mindszenty returned. Young soldiers went in their tanks to the prison where he was held. They disarmed the AVO guard and took him back to the Archbishop's palace in Buda in a victory march. Moments after his return, the Archbishop was speaking on radio and giving interviews to the foreign press.
Fogság után szólok a magyar haza valamennyi gyermekéhez.
It is after a long term of imprisonment that I can now speak to all children of the Hungarian fatherland.
Nincs gyűlölet szívemben.
There is hatred against no one in my heart.
Prime Minister Imre Nagy announces that the Soviet troops have received orders to leave the capital. He announces that it was his predecessors Hegedűs and Gerő who asked for the Soviet military assistance on 24th of October. I was crossing Köztársaság Square when I heard shots. I peeked towards the park from around the corner of Erkel Theatre. One of the machine gun nests of the revolutionaries was there. At first I didn't understand what was happening. I snuck forward to see better. One of the gunners told me that the AVO had barricaded themselves in the party headquarters across the square. The revolutionaries advanced forward under the cover of their 3 tanks. The gunners were also firing heavily. The AVO even shot at those running with stretchers. Then I heard shots. Those defending the party headquarters surrendered already, but I heard shots again. It wasn't the AWO, because the crowd didn't budge. I pushed forward, but by the time I reached the pavement, it was all over. I only heard what had happened. When the AWO saw that they could no longer hold their positions, they feigned surrender. This angered the revolutionaries even more. First they fired from cover on unsuspecting innocents, and they talk about a fair fight. The AWO bandits fought till the last man.
The most sensational announcement came on the evening of the 1st of November. Hungary was leaving the Warsaw Pact. Hungarians, the Hungarian national government hereby declares the neutrality of the Republic of Hungary. This heroic fight made it possible for us to assert our fundamental national interest, neutrality in our international relations. There are no incidents during the withdrawal of the Soviet troops. The rumor spreads, however, that additional Russian units are crossing the Romanian and the Soviet borders. Bright, late autumn day. The freedom struggle was victorious. Hungary has become a neutral state. Free elections will be held. The era of terror has come to an end. The government agrees to have the military victims of the freedom fight buried with military honors. Following his discussions on the 3rd of November with State Minister Tildi Maléter, who was promoted to Major General meanwhile, leaves for negotiations at the Soviet command. The hero of the Kilian garrison, the Minister of Defense of the new government, was invited by the Russians to discuss the withdrawals. Maléter never returned from this trip. Troops stationed in the capital were left without leadership.
Sunday, 4th of November, 4:30 a.m. Soviet divisions, several thousands of tanks are approaching Budapest, but the Soviets can't conquer the city with one offensive. The government's radio is still transmitting from the parliament. The radio message of Imre Nagy is aired for the first time at 5:15 a.m.
A Magyar Népköztársaság minisztertanácsának elnöke. Ma hajnalban a szovjet csapatok támadást indítottak fővárosunk ellen, ezzel a nyilvánvaló szándékkal, hogy megdöntsék a törvényes magyar demokratikus kormányt. Csapataink harcban állnak. A kormányzat helyén van. Ez közben az ország népével és a világ közvéleményével.
The freedom fighters had no chances against the overwhelming force. Still, they continued to fight for days in their isolated positions. Russian armor, meanwhile, swarmed the city. 60 kilometers from Budapest in Szolnok, János Kádár, the first secretary of the party, forms his communist government. Imre Nagy can't establish contact with his Minister of Defense. He finally understands that Maléter was traitorously lured into a trap. Responding to the urging of his supporters, he asked for asylum at the Yugoslav embassy.
The city suffered horrible damage. Within a few days, 50,000 homes are destroyed. 200,000 people are left without shelter. Thousands of wounded cannot be treated in beds in hospitals. On the 1st of November, All Saints' Day, candles were burning all over Budapest. They cast a trembling light on the grey atmosphere of death, which now dominated a happy city, which deserved to be loved. There's no word peace without the freedom of Hungary.
The 1956 revolution and the fight for the freedom caused heavy damages in our homeland. 200,000 fellow citizens immigrated. 3,000 people fell in the battles. 229 Hungarians were executed, out of them 6 women. Among the victims there were 16, 18-year-old students as well. In the prisons, 4,500 people were suffering under horrible conditions. The number of those who were carried off was unknown. A large number of houses were destroyed in Budapest and in the country too. The damages of those days couldn't be replaced completely anymore.